all of the sort of beautiful romance we have around the life of a journalist, I really believed in, and I saw it as a calling. Basically, my arc at the paper was I went from a few very easy, successful years to then towards the end of 2019, maybe middle of 2019, as what we now can see is a revolution was rising. It resisted having a name, of course. I hate the term like sort of the woke movement or whatever because it's so flattening. And I think the early days of woke were actually kind of cool and interesting. But whatever you want to call the revolution that we all just have seen over the last 5 years, when that started coming, I wanted to cover parts of it. I wanted to report on it. It was really interesting. I had been being rewarded for doing reporting on really interesting moments that were happening and finding interesting characters. And this was really interesting. And I was becoming kind of obsessed with what was going on. It was amazing. You would see groups of anti-fascists taking over a neighborhood in Seattle. All of this stuff was going on. At the same time, I met you and we were falling in love. And these two things started making it impossible for me within the paper. It was both my curiosity about kind of avenues of reporting that weren't going to necessarily help, let's say, Joe Biden's reelection chances or something like that, which, yeah, we'll get to that. But and starting to date you, that kind of simultaneously then all of a sudden made life much harder for me there. I had an editor, a great guy, say to me, in the office, in front of a group of colleagues, all of us having a drink, I can't believe you would go on a date with Barry Weiss. And I was like trying to laugh, I don't know, like it was an editor. And he said, she's a Nazi. She's a fucking Nazi. Straight to my face. In the moment, I was getting a little bit used to people saying really inappropriate things to me about you and about my curiosity about some of these reporting topics. And I thought I want to just get out of this situation. I want to just like get him to move on.
Yeah.
And he really was on it, but I was embarrassed. I was super embarrassed. I didn't want to be on the outs. And I didn't want to not please the editors around me. I wanted to please them. This was the only place I ever thought I would be. So it was sort of like, this is a person I'm going to have for the rest of my life as an editor. What do I do? Like I was panicked maybe. And so, and also I didn't want to get him in trouble because I really liked him and I like him. Like, and that's what's so crazy maybe. After the Nazi comment, it was almost explicit that the coverage at the Times and the coverage at every mainstream liberal publication had to explicitly help Joe Biden's reelection. And it became like, it has to help the party. And that used to be maybe subtly, or, journalists have always been liberal. It's not like, that's not a surprise. Like, I thought my politics fit in just great. But it became much more explicit and stated. And
let's explain that for people, right? So one example I really remember, and this is a chapter in your new book, was during the rioting of the summer of 2020, right? There were peaceful BLM protests, but then of course there were violent riots that left whole cities, or at least parts of cities, destroyed in their wake. And you were a business reporter at the time, and I remember you saying, this is a really interesting business story.
Yeah.
I want to go to Kenosha. Because the whole story that was being told is, oh, all those small business owners have insurance, it's no big deal. And you were skeptical about that. Tell us about the decision to go and report that story, and then what happened, because this is really what I remember, in the wake of you coming back with the story that you did.
The district that was burned was this poor minority-owned district, and the city was scrambling to try to figure out how to pay for the rebuild. And so I wanted to go and see with my own eyes what happened there. Mm-hmm. I wanted to see what I'd only seen through super partisan media. Mm-hmm. So at the time, the only media coverage out of these cities was either right-wing media that was saying like, Antifa destroy the entire city of Kenosha, like all caps, like like you've seen the YouTubes,
Of course.
and then left-wing media that's like peaceful protest, like
The fiery but peaceful CNN.
exactly.
Right.
And I was sort of going crazy with that. I was like, there's what's actually going on? So I pitched that great business story. I come back with that story, and basically, I mean, it sounds so petty now, but it's basically slow rolled. It's basically that we're not going to have space to run a story about what happened in Kenosha. We're not going to have space. And more than explicit lies about what was happening in 2020, how the mainstream media controlled the narrative was by not covering it. That was the most important thing. It was to ignore it. And it was to all of us collectively agree to ignore it.
We were on different sides of the paper, right? So I was on the opinion side, you were on the news side, but we saw different versions of the same story, which is things that adhered to the convenient, politically helpful narrative sort of sailed in.
Yeah, of
and
course.
anything that didn't was scrutinized, caveated, slow-rolled, etc. Now, Kenosha was one story I really remember you doing. The other story I really remember now was the story that you did about, I don't remember if the end of the day the name was Chaz or Chop, but this autonomous zone in Seattle.
Yes.
Would you read from a little part of that chapter?
Why, I would. This was a time when the mainstream media toyed with the idea that righteous vigilantes were good, very good, and only the weak-kneed would question whether the protest should have a little edge, that frisson of danger. People's hearts are always in the right place. The protest was fiery but peaceful, is how a now famous CNN Chiron described one Antifa outing. The correspondent was reporting against a backdrop of raging fires as the word peaceful sat on the screen. The scene looked comically unpeaceful. "We don't have time to finger wag at protesters about property," said Black Lives Matter co-founder Alicia Garza. Ignoring destruction of a local business became official policy for New York-based media. David Remnick, the editor of The New Yorker, wrote a meditation at the height of the protest, asking, who really is the agitator here? He cites Martin Luther King Jr. Even looting, King insisted, is an act of catharsis, a form of shocking the white community by abusing property rights. Then King quoted Victor Hugo to deepen his point. If a soul is left in the darkness, sins will be committed. The guilty one is not he who commits the sin, but he who causes the darkness. That's the kicker to Remnick's essay. NPR held a friendly Q&A about the importance of riots and looting as a protest tactic, with the author of a book titled simply, In Defense of Looting. Nicole Hannah-Jones, the creator of the 1619 Project, and by then the most famous American reporter, agreed. Violence is when an agent of the state kneels on a man's neck until all of the life is leached out of his body. Destroying property, which can be replaced, is not violence. To use the same language to describe these two things is not moral, she told CBS News. Anyway, Antifa itself was just fun. Masked vigilantes have always saved the world, became the media's line. Another prominent Times reporter tweeted, if your grandfather fought in the war against Nazi Germany or Imperial Japan, they were Antifa. Writer and director W. Kamau Bell did a special on Antifa for CNN. Antifa is short for anti-fascist, he said. Picture a table. On one side of the table is Hitler and Mussolini, and on the other side is the popular performer Rafi. Which side of the table are you sitting on? I'm with Rafi. In a video called The Real Antifa, the Lincoln Project, a lobbying group for Democrats spearheaded by former Republicans, showed clips of World War II soldiers while a gravelly-voiced narrator read, anti-fascism. It's not a cable news talking point. It's an American ideal that should be memorialized. Or perhaps another way of putting it, loot and burn everything. Fuck this. Who the fuck cares about looting? Wrote Imani Gandhi, an editor with the Progressive Rewire news group. Stop killing us. Maybe destroying small businesses was good. Small businesses aren't unionized. Small businesses aren't accountable. All those little burned-out shops were part of the structural problem. Bhaskar Sunkara, president of The Nation, a major leftist magazine, said essentially that it was bad tactics but good politics to end small businesses. So if by attack small businesses, you mean encourage the looting of them, sure, that's technically counterproductive. But we should aim to undermine small business owners with pro-worker legislation/unions and to reconstitute them as worker-controlled state firms or co-ops. A writer from the progressive magazine Jacobin joined in. We shouldn't fetishize mom and pops. They offer lower wages, skimpier benefits, and inferior labor protections. Delighted by the warm press reception, random members of Antifa started releasing their own statements and appearing on news shows, their faces backlit to keep anonymity. The use of violence is a tactic of how we keep our communities safe, an anonymous member told Nightline. The whole point of protesting is to make people uncomfortable, said Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. A Slate magazine headline read, "Nonviolence is an important tool for protests, but so is violence." The rhetoric at the time was, at best, heated, even occasionally exceeding the ever-polite Trump. One prominent activist and media darling tweeted at Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, "I'm going to be the person who watches the life leave your eyes."
So there's
It's hardcore. I mean, the rhetoric was insane. The rhetoric was wild. And now, of course, it's being memory holed. All of it's being memory holed. Like, obviously, the stuff around Antifa and people pretend like, well, because at the time, the context for that section is people were pretending Antifa wasn't real. And the media's job was to pretend Antifa wasn't real. And if Antifa was real,
it was
then
good. And that was sort of the move with constant things, right? It wasn't just about Antifa. That same rhetorical move is the thing doesn't exist, the thing doesn't exist, the thing doesn't exist. But when it's proven that it exists, it was good.
Yes. And so what was happening at that moment was that we were being told that the Black Lives Matter protests had no Antifa element and no sort of violent element, that they were all just peaceful, and any part that was violent was probably a conservative, right-wing white supremacist trying to undermine the BLM movement. And so that was kind of the explanation for what you were seeing on TV. And what you were seeing was cities lit on fire and, chaos and violence, and also beautiful protests, and also like peaceful things. It was the mix, but it was a mix that included violence. And Seattle gave away the lie a little bit. And because there you saw the complete and public alliance of Antifa and BLM. Now, what is Antifa and why is it interesting and why is it important to say it was entwined? It's because Antifa believes in violent protest and the frisson of more violence. The idea that we're not going to just talk about our goals. Antifa brings that in and says, this is now on the table. BLM had a softer reputation. It was nonviolent marches. It was being embraced by corporate America, glossy magazines. And so
every major brand.
Yeah. And so Antifa was tricky for the brand, but it was very useful for the actual tangible actions and to make that protest a little bit fiery, which made it a little more dramatic and made it a little, gave it that energy. And so at the time, basically the mainstream press, including the New York Times, was openly lying about the connection between these groups. But I went to these places. I went to Seattle, I went to Portland, I went to Kenosha, and the alliance was completely real. They were all working together as one movement for that period of time. And how do I know it's Antifa? Antifa, they say they're a leaderless autonomous movement. They all dress alike. They carry guns. They mask their faces. It's a so-called leaderless movement that is extraordinarily disciplined and extraordinarily organized. I remember being in situations where I would be like, well, maybe the police could be defunded a little, but not abolished. And that was considered a crazy thing to say at dinner. That was the extent to where the rhetoric went within mainstream media and within the reporter community, which is a very tight-knit, lockstep community, right? The rhetoric had gone so extreme that anything to the right of abolish was fascist.
I remember really distinctly you going to report this story about Chaz Chop and me being like, this is an unbelievable story. This is the kind of thing a Tom Wolfe or a Joan Didion would have written about. It's incredible. And you had a really different reaction from some people at the New York Times about this story specifically. What was it?
Basically, when I was heading to report that story, and then when I came back and we published that story, the attacks on me became much more intense. I had colleagues, I mean, it sounds so petty now because they were tweeting mean things, okay?
Right.
Fine. It was on Twitter, and they were tweeting really mean things about me.
Yeah.
And it was the first time when I realized, oh, this kind of social shaming that's happening quietly in the cafeteria or over drinks or whatever, this is going to become public. And this is going to become a thing I have to deal with in the public sphere. And I could, not that I've memorized all the mean tweets, but let's just say they think I was a fascist, and anyone who reports on Chaz and Chop is a monster. And no, they were mean. It was really nasty. It was like middle school, but like the pettiest middle schoolers you can imagine.
I know.
Like imagine them real nasty,
Oh, I
but kind
can.
of good writers. And
They're
and it
really
was-
good at being mean.
yeah, yes. The person who's the lead kind of soldier of censorship is a low-level wire cutter writer
Right.
who was in the all-company Slack leading brigades against the top politics reporters. And the top politics reporters would have to get in the muck and like argue with her.
Well, that was one
And
of
it
the
was
crazy things that
insane.
happened is like the
Well, there was the all
newspapers,
company
like
Slack.
anything, rely on a hierarchy.
Yeah.
And what happened because of Slack and because of Twitter was there was just a total flattening of that.
It was a very bizarre thing that the paper allowed to happen and in some ways encouraged to happen.
Say more about that. Because I think the Times, if, someone...
Because it was
from
good
the
for your career internally.
Why?
Because the leadership of the Times, the top leadership didn't love this, obviously. They had the old school values. They wanted good journalism. And it was that the broader movement was beyond controlling. And within that movement, you could rise up. So you could rise up among your colleagues by going after a reporter who stepped out of line. And you were applauded, and you sort of rose in prestige among the cohort of reporters. And so it was a good career move to do that. It was. Even if the bosses didn't love it, it was good. You rose in the estimation of your colleagues. And I knew that. I knew that the people who were doing these things to me or to others were going to win within the context of the paper. And I knew that I was going to lose. I also knew that the pressure you have as a reporter when you're doing controversial stories, which I often do, is enormous. You're going into the arena, you're in battle, you're doing an investigation, the person might not like it. You're writing about something that isn't flattering, you're gonna get pushback. And throughout my career, I've written stories where I get pushback because of my personality, because of the kind of things I write, because I make a little fun, or I make a little this, or I report on something they didn't want me to write about, or whatever. That's the job of a reporter, is you're in the arena and you're not pleasing everyone, and that's okay, and you've got to be tough. But I could only do that from a place where my colleagues and my editors are standing behind me. And you can only do that if you know that you're in an institution that will keep you
Protected. Have your back.
Yeah, that will have your back. And I was increasingly aware that that wasn't the case, and that actually my colleagues were the ones who were going to make my life very, very hard. They were going to publicly criticize my stories. They were going to engage with the nastiest trolls. Then they were going to use every private thing I did within the newspaper. Everything I said in every meeting would suddenly be shared with outside. I started getting calls from reporters from other publications who had knowledge of things that only could be known if my colleagues were telling them. And I had nothing to be ashamed of. I was proud of my work, proud of the things I was saying, which was pitching more stories. But I was realizing, oh, wow, this world is going to tighten around me. And at the same time then was honestly very influential for me was the Donald McNeil situation, where I saw a Times man who'd been there his whole career. He devoted himself to the newspaper. And without getting into the details, because it's like silly and too much and bizarre, honestly, I saw his life get destroyed by this movement in a very irrational way. And I saw him get his entire reputation destroyed very, very gleefully. And I just saw this really kind of noble man
Ruined.
ruined by this movement. And it upset me. So I was pissed off for his sake, but also I was thinking, okay, so let's say I make it through this period of time.
Right.
Let's say I just
Muscle through it.
muscle through. Then what? This movement, once it wants to destroy your reputation, it will succeed. If you want to stay within one of these institutions and the movement of
If you want to
sort of
stay in the
activist-
old prestige world,
yeah,
then you have to make accommodations to it if you want to protect your reputation and your career.
yeah, and if you don't, it will destroy your reputation and your career. And at that point, I hadn't been canceled. I had all my I had all my bits and bops. I was feeling still pretty confident, and I was sort of like,
I'm going to get
do
out.
I want to sit around here until they figure out how to cancel me in some real way? I'm sure I'll say something, like, I don't know. I told someone they had a nice haircut a couple weeks ago. Like, was that illegal? Probably. Like, you start to go paranoid. And so I started to realize, okay, there's really not an option for me to stay.
I think that this story that you're describing and the story I lived through or the story Donald McNeil through, they're all versions of the same thing, which is you out yourself either intentionally or inadvertently in some way as some kind of heretic to this movement. Then the target is put on your back. And this is especially the case if you are of the wrong identity in some way. They find a way to go after you. And I remember really, really clearly a moment that I was like, this is not going to go well for Nellie. And it was when some like sub-editor or copy editor read one of your stories and accused you of employing the white gaze. And we don't need to go into that story, but the reason I bring it up is because one of the things that was happening at this time that you report on in your new book is the rise of a part of this movement, let's say, that describes itself as being anti-racist. The last chapter of your book, I think, is just so beautiful and vulnerable. And it's really about your decision to break away from the old world. And I want you to tell us about the kind of decision point you faced about whether or not to join in on canceling someone who was a colleague and is now a good friend of ours, and why you decided not to.
Yeah. So my real end with the movement came when I didn't cancel someone. And before that, I'd canceled a person or two. I'd been part of it. I'd been part of whatever the call of the day was. I hadn't questioned it. And I'd done it quite gleefully.
Why? What's gleeful about it? What's joyful about canceling someone?
In one of the chapters, I write about canceling a friend. And it was a positive experience doing it because I felt immense camaraderie with my community while I was doing it. I felt like I was doing justice. And the person I was canceling was someone who was just very similar to me, very closely aligned politically, but had stepped out of line a little bit.
I just want to read this line that I think is so true and smart, where you say, a cancellation isn't about finding a conservative and yelling at them. It's about finding the betrayer in your midst.
Yeah, so I had been a very good soldier of the movement, but there was a day that came when I couldn't join in a cancellation mob. And it sounds so, I keep saying this, but it's so silly. But when you're in it, these feel so, they feel like the most important thing in the world. And basically, there was a young man, a colleague of both of ours, who had been involved with an op-ed that got everyone really upset that day. And we were all supposed to tweet that the op-ed put our Black colleagues in danger and basically call for this young man to be fired. And I couldn't do it. I have this anxiety response where my arms go limp when I'm really anxious. Like it's like a psychosomatic problem. And I remember sitting in the apartment and my arms were limp and I was sweating and I was just like, this is so pathetic. Like, I can't believe I can't do this, but I just couldn't cancel him. I couldn't tweet out the tweet we were all supposed to tweet. And because of that, I mean, also for a listener, this is the only point of mild bravery in the entire book. It's all about me going along with everything. And the only thing I do to like mildly protest is just not do a cancellation one time. So this is my heroics. And I just couldn't do it. And I didn't do it.
And what happened?
And from that, several friends reached out and on that very day ended their friendships with me. It was stunning. One very good friend. And it was so shocking to me. And I realized that I was done. That the movement was done with me and I was done with the movement. And I just couldn't force it anymore. Mm. And I think part of what had happened was, I think it was two things. I'm really close with a lot of my family members. They all have really different politics. Some of them are really conservative. I mean real conservatives. I don't mean like never Trumpers like your dad over here. I mean like Trumpers. I mean like Trump might be a little soft people. and
we may or may not be thinking of the same uncle who we love.
And I love my family members. And I was having a really hard time with some of the really wild rhetoric that was being said about folks like this. It wasn't sitting right with me. And so there was that was happening kind of in my heart where I was like, I can't say this about everyone who disagrees with me politically is not like a Nazi who deserves to be like, have their vote taken away. It just isn't the case. They just disagree, but we can still all have a nice Thanksgiving. And so there was that. And then there was also that we were together. I'd fallen in love with you fully and completely. And you were someone who this group was constantly trying to cancel and constantly trying to disavow and constantly disavowing. And so I had seen that, and I'd seen how absurd it was and how flattening this movement was and how flat it wanted to make our lives, how uncomplicated, when life is complicated and politics are complicated and humans are complicated. And like, I just am not going to like put these strict, ridiculous boundaries on who can be in my world and who can't be. So anyways, so those two factors made it so I just couldn't cancel that day. I couldn't tweet the tweet. I couldn't tweet the fucking tweet. The one thing I needed to do, and I couldn't do it. And then it was done. And then I was really out. So that was the end of that era of my life, really. And it felt, I mean, in the same way that I felt the camaraderie of being part of canceling people and the camaraderie of being part of feeling on the side of justice, releasing myself from the confines of that movement also felt good.
I think